Edward Stow, thank you very much for giving me your time, sir. I've watched a lot of your channels, well, your House of Lechmere, every single thing. I mean, yours and Richard Jones, they're literally what babysit me on a night. Yep. I'm just in the process now of finishing up a book called "There's Something About Whitechapel." Listen, I'm not an expert by any means. I'm not like yourself or Lindsay Siviter, Mick Priestley, Martin Fido, God rest him, Stuart Evans, Paul Begg. You guys are the elite. I'm just someone with a bit of energy who's really interested in the case. But the reason I'm interested in getting you on, Ed, is obviously I've got two theories on Jack the Ripper. One is basically, like Paul Begg said to me and Lindsay Siviter, and even Richard Jones, it was someone who we don't even know, we're not aware of. Just a poor Polish Jew. But apart from that, I'm completely convinced with the same theory of you that it was Charles Lechmere. So take me back, Edward. How did you kind of fall into the Jack the Ripper rabbit hole, if you like? Where did it all start for you?
Well, I've been interested in it since I was quite young. I kept clippings about, for example, Kosminski, who I thought was probably the most likely suspect before. Not as totally convincing, which is why I never really got into it properly, because there's such big flaws with Kosminski as a suspect, the Polish Jew suspect. Kosminski himself, the police, his suspect status is based on the fact that the police named him. And so because the police named him, the argument is they must have had grounds or good grounds for suspecting him. Although in the document, the Norton Memorandum, which mentioned him, the first document that came to light that mentioned him, there's two other suspects that are mentioned. One is a guy called Ostrog, who he thought was a good suspect, and we know that he wasn't because he was in jail at the time. So that shows you how good the police were in there. If they were the three,
he was actually in France at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, and the other one was Montague Druitt, who is such an unlikely suspect. It's almost ridiculous, and it's recently come to light that he was playing cricket in Dorset the day before the murder of Polly Nichols, and for him to have got home, we'd have had to sort of rush home, kill Polly Nichols, and then rush back to playing cricket the day after as well in Dorset. So he supposedly rushed up to London to murder Polly Nichols in an area of London they had no connection with, the East End, and then rushed back to Dorset with playing a cricket match on either day, with one little day in between. It's hardly credible. And there's all sorts of other aspects about Druitt which make him unlikely as well. And the third one that was mentioned by the police was Kosminski. And with Druitt, they got fundamental details about him wrong, such as saying he was a doctor, which he wasn't. He was a barrister and a school teacher. So if he was a big suspect, why would they get fundamental details of him wrong? It sort of suggests that they didn't really know what they were talking about, and he couldn't have really been that good a suspect if they get such basic details wrong. And the third one is Kosminski, and they get basic details wrong, such as later when they spoke about that he died soon after he was incarcerated in an insane asylum, when in fact he didn't die until after the First World War, about
1919, I think it was.
Yeah, getting on for 30 years later. So if he was such a great suspect, they clearly didn't keep tabs on him. He's in Leaves in insane asylum, and the records in Leaves in insane asylum for other suspects, other people, other inmates who the police had an interest in, they had file notes saying, tell us if this bloke gets released, because sometimes people got released from these insane asylums. And so they'd put a file note in saying, if this person ever gets released, tell us straight away, or you're about to release him. Tell us straight away because we think he's a nutcut, he's a danger, or we want him for some other offence. But there's no note in the Kosminski file of that nature in Leavesden. So again, it sort of suggests that they weren't keeping a tabs on him. He's the greatest criminal in the history of Britain, up to this day. Pretty much, Jack the Ripper is the greatest.
Who done it? It's the Everest of British crime, in my opinion.
Yeah, he clearly is. And the idea that they wouldn't have put a note in their file about him, or the idea that they just didn't know that he hadn't died almost 30 years before is just ridiculous. So that's what somewhat undermines the case against Kosminski. And modern Kosminski theorists, the other problem with Kosminski is one of the main reasons the police thought he was potentially the suspect was that he, or the culprit, I should say, is that he was mad, and they thought the culprit would be a madman. They also thought the culprit would very likely be a non-English person, because they didn't want they weren't comfortable with the idea that the culprit would be an Englishman, and so they ticked two boxes: he was foreign, and he was mad. Now, mad people don't make repeat serial killers. They may kill one person. They tend to be casual about their escape routes and so forth, and they tend to get caught straight away. It's like, but that didn't. Obviously, he was a stealth killer that must have made quite a lot of planning involved in what these crimes, and so a mad serial killer couldn't really be a serial killer, actually, unless he killed several people one after another in a short space of time in some sort of big spree. But that's what schizophrenic type killers sometimes do, but they don't become planning long-term killers. And so the fact that the police said he was his mad status, which led to his incarceration in Leavesden Insane Asylum, modern Kosminski theorists, people who favour Kosminski as the Ripper, have to downplay. So he wasn't really mad. When he committed the crimes, it was during a lucid moment, which sort of undermines the case. One of the main things the police always mentioned, the primary thing they always mentioned, was the fact that he was mad. So he didn't actually kill them. Modern theorists have to say that he didn't kill his victims while he was being mad, but he was like he had these sane moments when he killed the people, which doesn't really add up again. Those are why. Anyway, that's why I think Kosminski is another weak suspect, but he was probably the best until the Lechmere theory was developed. That he was probably the best, and that shows how poor Ripper suspects have been in the past, really.
So am I right in saying that the Lechmere theory kind of come in about the last 40 years, isn't it?
40, no. His identity, as you mentioned, I think his name is in the official files where he's mentioned, he's called Charles Cross, and the fact that his real name was Charles Lechmere was only touched upon, losing track of time, 15 years ago, roughly 15 years. So he remained secret, as far as his true identity remains secret for way over 100 years, 120 years almost. And that's how successful his hidden identity was. And a couple of different people in about 15 years ago discovered that he was that there's this character called Charles Cross was actually Charles Lechmere, or they thought he probably was this guy called Charles Lechmere by reference to the electoral registers and census details for his address in Doveton Street, which is near
Bethnal Green.
Yeah, near Bethnal Green. It came under an area called Mile End Old Town, but you'd sort of colloquially you'd say it was Bethnal Green, but it technically wasn't. And because East End districts, as you may know, what people identify with them doesn't necessarily line up with municipal boundaries. You know, the people who draw
Can I just ask you, Edward, where are you actually from? Which part of London are you from?
Well, originally I'm from Surrey, right. But I lived in the East End for about 20 years-ish, 20 years probably. I live in Essex now. Right,
okay. I mean, have you ever thought of, obviously I've watched everything of yours and you've really dug deep. Have you ever actually thought, hang on a minute, I'm going to actually put what I found in a book? Because what I've seen on your channel really is a first from anywhere else.
Well, I started the channel during lockdown, actually, because not something that was what probably spurred me to do it during, because there wasn't a lot to do during lockdown, was there?
Yeah.
And a lot, I haven't done a film just lately. I actually work.
I know.
But I haven't done one lately. It's not because I've run out of things to say or do, but it's because I have no time lately. I work a lot, and if I'm working, it takes quite a lot of thought doing those things, and preparation and all that sort of stuff. I just haven't had time to do it, and there's quite a few more films I do want to do. Probably another 100, because there are lots of aspects to the Lechmere case. Actually, there's lots of components to it, and I want to go through the other suspects as well, a bit like I was just discussing just a second ago. Lots of people ask me to do that, and that's another interesting aspect. All the other suspects, why they became suspects.
I mean, on the subject of that, Edward, there's been over 200 books and easily as many suspects. But would you agree with me in saying, I mean, there's a lot of them that are really farcical, and some people bring them like the royal family, and you're just like, oh, give us a break. And he wasn't even in the country for 4 or 5 murders. But I mean, obviously I've researched for 30 years, but would you agree in saying there's probably 15 to 24 really elite, serious contenders that I could sit in front of you, all these kind of, your Lechmeres and maybe your Thomas Cutbushes, and and you'd be convinced, and then I'd bring someone else over and you'd go, yeah, we found him. Would you right in saying that's correct, or?
Not personally. There's various different suspect forums around. I don't know if you looked at them.
I've seen everything.
And I've engaged in a lot of back and forth on different suspects in the past, and there are some better than others. I would say there's, you say 20. How many did you say? 24. I would say there's probably
15 to 24.
Yeah, the only ones I've discussed, I mean, in a slight way, people. I've got a bit of a reputation annoying people, probably, if I'm being truthful, in pulling their theories apart, saying this didn't, and getting people's backs up over it. And then when I come in with my theory, the Lechmere theory is very controversial within Ripperology and heavily argued over the most ridiculous things. If somebody supportive of Lechmere said, "Oh, the sky was quite dark on the night," someone said, "No, it was light. It was light." They'd almost argue ridiculous because he say, "Oh, he committed the crimes in the dark. That's how he got away with it." I said, "No, he didn't. No, he didn't. It was light at night." They'd almost say that, something stupid argument like that, just because the arguments are used in support of Lechmere theory, and they get into all sorts of knots because actually, in my opinion, the Lechmere theory is very watertight. You can't really attack it on any sensible grounds. It doesn't mean, by the way, 100% that you can't. Don't really say that, really, that it's 100% that he did it, because it's the nature of the beast. But he's by far the best and most likely suspect, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it is watertight. But most of the other suspects, like I pointed out a couple of things about Druitt, and I pointed out a couple of things about Kosminski. Some people like Tumblety, for example, but I've entered into great long debates about Tumblety, who is an American one, for those who don't know. He's an American guy who was over here.
I mean, to be honest, Edward, it's like Patricia Cornwell has convinced Walter Sickert. She spent millions. Stuart Evans is convinced, and everyone has their own suspect. You were the kind of Charles Lechmere man. But, obviously, just finish off what you were saying there. But before after that, could you, because I'm going to share this to all the Ripper pages. So obviously this is going to get good views eventually. And can you sell people why Lechmere?
Well, as you sort of hinted at the beginning, he is effectively the unknown local man that lots of people in Ripperology say, "Oh, I think I can't remember who said it now, actually, but someone, one of the big old names of Ripperology, said that if it was ever hypothetically the case that someone said, 'This is the man,' and unveiled the Ripper, everyone would turn around and say, 'Who's he?' Because they wouldn't have heard of him, some unknown local man."
Yeah.
Lechmere is effectively the unknown local man because he was a part of the woodwork, just a guy going about his everyday life, and that fits the profile. The people who are serial killers are invariably banal local guys who don't stand out and never, God, see that guy do. That's just how it normally is, and that doesn't mean Lechmere did it in itself, but he does fit the profile to very closely, in my opinion. His family background, all sorts of things. The fact that he moved. One of the things that proved that Charles Lechmere was Charles Cross was that, which is the final piece in the jigsaw, proving that Charles Cross was Charles Lechmere, was that he moved from his address in a place called James Street, which is in actually quite close to where Elizabeth Stride was murdered, to Dubton Street, which is on the route which took him down Bucks Row, which is where Polly Nichols was murdered, in June of that year. So he moved from very close to his mother, where he'd always lived all his life, really, in the area. It's called St George's in the East, which is the area around James Street and near Berners Street, where the Pinchin Street torso was found. Yeah. He lived in Pinchin Street as well, and he moved to Dubton Street, which took him on this different route to work, which is pretty much along that route is where he was killing, or along or off the route. And there's so many compelling facts like that involved in it, which tie him into the murders. He's the only suspect where you can do a proper crime scene investigation. If you're going to say, just say you want to say that Thickett did it, who is completely unlikely, and there's all due respect to Patricia Cornwall, slightly nutty candidate, actually, eccentric candidate, I'd have to say. He would have had to have magically got to the East End, an area which he had no real connection to, and serial killers nearly always kill, criminals nearly always commit their crimes in an area where they're familiar, because it gives them a degree of confidence and familiarity. And that's why they commit crimes in places like that. So why would Thickett? He magically ends up in the East End. There's no sort of he killed Polly Nichols in this way, or he killed Annie Chapman in this way. There's none of that involved in any of those books. It's just that he magically ended up, killed them, and went away again. That's the crime scene investigation of all of them actually. If Druitt did it, he just magically ended up in the East End, killed her, disappeared just as Charles Lechmere was walking down the road behind him, and Charles Lechmere just missed him, but while he was killing Polly Nichols or whoever else. And all of them, he's only so. In people in Ripperology aren't used to what I would say proper criminal investigation of a case about what happened. And when you look at the detail of what Lechmere did at Bucks Row, from the record we have, is actually quite incriminating as well. Involved with how he met this guy called Robert Paul, who was coming up the road behind him, how they weren't aware of each other when they would have been walking down the road together beforehand. They weren't aware of each other. The fact that the whole touching of the body thing, the whole fact that it's the only body where the official record was that a policeman found the body because they weren't known about for several days, and it's the only murder where of the Ripper murders, or any of the Whitechapel murders, not just the Ripper, because they're just for your viewers' benefit. The Whitechapel murders and the Ripper murders are a subset of the Whitechapel murders. So there's a bigger group of murders which are called the Whitechapel murders, and within them we have the Ripper murders. I actually think they were nearly all committed by Charles Lechmere, and they were all Ripper murders.
All 11?
Not necessarily all 11, but the weakest two are probably Emma Smith, the first one, and the last one, Francis Coles. But I'm less certain about those two. But the others, I'm pretty sure all were. Martha Tabram, Mackenzie, I'm pretty sure they were. And the torsos, I don't know if you know,
I'm fully aware of it, but obviously explain to the viewers.
Okay, at the same time as the Jack the Ripper murders, there was a series of other murders called colloquially known as the Thames torso murders, where torso body parts were found in the River Thames from before and after the official Ripper murders took place. And so they were all killed. The torso murders were all killed or cut up in the same way. So almost certainly the same person responsible for all the torso murders, rather than being murdered by different people. So there would have to have been two serial killers operating in London at the same time when there hadn't been one. Well, there was the highway. The last time would have been the highway murders, which was 60 years before, over 60 years before. And we have two at the same time. It just doesn't seem incredible to me. And if you're investigating it again now, I think you would look to see very closely to see whether they were actually the same person. Some of the, oh, they were so different. One's cutting bodies up, chopping in the river. The other is murdering people in the street. But that can easily be accounted for if he had if he had persuaded someone, say, to go back to a particular location and had them in his power, and then had to dispose of the body within a building of some sort. He would obviously do it differently than if he'd killed someone in the street. The primal motivation of the killer would probably be the same, which is power and over his victim, which is usually the motivating factor of these serial killers. But also with Lechmere, he's probably about the only suspect you can make a case for that he did the torsos and the Ripper murders, because he was alive for the whole period and not incarcerated besides anything else. He also lived, as I said, one of the torsos was found in a place called Pinchin Street. They're called the Thames torso murders because most of the body parts were found in the River Thames, not all, but most. And the Pinchin Street torso, there was only one part of it. There weren't any arms and legs, it was just the torso. Most of the other ones, all different bits were found. But the Pinchin Street torso, which was cut up in the same way, the same evidence, limbs were severed in the same way as the other torsos, was found inland, slightly about a mile inland from the River Thames, in Pinchin Street under a railway arch, which is where Lechmere had lived. He had lived in Pinchin Street when it had previously been called Thomas Street, and his mother had lived there later. The arch is on like an embankment that's still there, not an embankment, like a viaduct that's still there. And when they built this viaduct in the 1880s, they knocked down a road that led into Pinchin Street, or the end of the road that led into Pinchin Street, called Split Street, actually. And Lechmere's mother, who had married a guy who lived in a house that was demolished to create the arch where the Pinchin Street torso was found, which is a bit of a strange one, isn't it?
I mean, Ed, so there was 11 witnesses, eyewitnesses, who probably seen Jack the Ripper, and to kind of back your theory up, he wasn't far off exactly how people have said. Listen, slightly a bit taller than the victim, moustache. Was it 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", that kind of fitted Lechmere as well, in the exact same age, obviously, at that time of his life. Would you agree?
Yes, I'm personally unconvinced about any of the witness. Take Lechmere out of the equation for a moment. I tend to be doubtful that you could place any credence on the eyewitness, any of the eyewitness statements. Eyewitness statements are, people think, oh, a witness saw them, therefore that's very good evidence in a case. But virtually every study that's ever been made on eyewitnesses, they're about the most useless part of any identification, because people want to believe they saw something to assist in the case. Well, if you're walking down the street and something happened, because you don't know that anything's happened, you're walking down the street and then you find out later the next day that something happened in that street that you walk down. Would you remember a single thing about it? Anyone that you passed would be able to identify them? Most people wouldn't have a hope in hell, because they're all now in their own thoughts. They're not looking, oh, that person looks like this, that person looks like that, he's got a moustache and that one's got a cap like a sailor. You don't take any notice of that, do you? So when the murder then occurs and you're, God, I walked down that street and the murder occurred there, they recreate memory to try and make themselves helpful. They're trying to be helpful. Some people possibly because they want to get their 5 minutes of fame, but a lot of people, they just want to be helpful. And they, oh yeah, I did see someone and he looked like this. And I don't think you can put any and it's often their own prejudices that they're actually describing. And I don't think you can really put any real credence to any of them.
Yeah.
You could, but by the same token, you could make the case that Lechmere was every single one of them if you wanted to, or none of them. You know, because they're so
Can I ask you, Ed? So obviously your channel drew me in probably about a year ago, and it's one. I mean, I'm very selective of what I watch on YouTube because there's so much toxic, and you know, it's particularly bad at the minute with nonsense and bare knuckle fighters, and it's, you know, it's not. But I've watched everything in detail with yourself. So where did the idea come from, and what's your hopes for this channel? For Edward's channel, I've put the link for his channel in the bio. So if you click on it, it'll take you right the way through it. There's some really extremely riveting videos on. I've watched them all. So what's your plans, Edward? Are you going to build on it? I mean, do you want thousands? Obviously, you've got so much more content to put out.
Well, my end game, I think you did touch on this just now. It's not my end game, but my aim is to write. You know, I'm writing a book. My close colleague Krista Holmgren has written a book. Who did the documentary? There's a documentary on Lechmere.
I have seen it, yeah. Well, maybe about a year back. But how would I watch it? Because it's not on YouTube.
No, it's been taken down. I think probably copyright reasons. It was taken down. It was on YouTube for a long time. I'm not sure it's on that other channel, Vimeo or whatever it's called, Vimbo or some other one.
Yeah, I'll have a look for it later. I mean that documentary, it quite clearly says
it's on the telly every other month. So it's called The New Evidence. The original title was The Missing Evidence.
Right.
I'm still in touch with the producer of it, actually. I got on quite well. Met him, obviously. The series wasn't just about Jack the Ripper. There was about 5 different episodes on different subjects. I think one was Marilyn Monroe, and they're all called Missing Evidence. Saying Missing Evidence, Marilyn Monroe.
Can I just say, Edward? So I've got a comment, Stella Marie Smithson. So she's just subbed to the new sub. So obviously I'm going to share this later. So listen, I mean, as I said, I don't really watch many channels, and you were one I've completely glued. So thanks, Stella, for your support, and watch his channel. So, sorry, go on, Edward.
So there's a series called by this production company called Blink TV. Blink Productions, I think they're called, actually, and they did a little series called The Missing Evidence, and out of the 5 or so episodes, the only one that really gets regularly repeated is the Jack the Ripper one, which I assisted with. I gave them really the story. What happened? I don't know if you know this. The Lechmere family, who some of them still live in the East End, actually. His son, one of his sons, and his grandson and his daughter-in-law all died in a thing called the Bethnal Green Tube disaster in the Second World War in 1943. There was, along with, have you heard of Hutchinson? You mustn't know the suspect George Hutchinson.
Yes.
George Hutchinson, who's one of the better suspects, to be fair to George.
Well, he's actually Frederick Aberline's favourite suspect. Obviously, he was a different name, Polish barber, poisoned 3 of his wives.
That's George Chapman.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm getting it mixed up, but I have heard of him as well.
Yeah. George Hutchinson was a witness who saw supposedly Mary Kelly walking down Commercial Street shortly before she was murdered.
Yeah.
Anyway, so George Hutchinson, there's this guy called Reg Hutchinson, who is a son of a George Hutchinson, that said that was his dad. And some people dispute. The people who favour George Hutchinson as the Ripper dispute that Reg Hutchinson was really the son of George Hutchinson. Well, he was a son of George Hutchinson, but they claim he was the son of a different George Hutchinson. But it's a bit, if he says that my dad was George Hutchinson, he was the witness, and the witness was called George Hutchinson, it's a bit stupid doubting it, in my opinion, but people do, because it doesn't fit their suspect theory, because that George Hutchinson lived a quite normal life. And anyway, two of his grandchildren were killed in the Bethnal Green Tube disaster as well, by such strange coincidence. So there's 2 Hutchinsons and 3 Lechmeres killed in the Bethnal Green Tube disaster, which happened in 1943 during the war, obviously, at Bethnal Green Tube station. I don't know if you know about Bethany Tube
Yes,
Disaster.
I do. Yeah.
There's a plaque there, and there's a big monument next to the tube station with their names on, of the victims. And there was a committee set up to raise money for this monument. Barbara Windsor was actually one of the sponsors of it, and the guy called Tommy Walsh, who's the ground force guy, and Cheryl Baker, you know, from Bucks Fizz. So
Yeah.
East End celebrity types supported the charity to create a monument for the victims of the Bedford Tube disaster. Because it happened in the war, it was hushed up. And I did some fundraising things for it, but I did a few tours around the East End to raise money for them. And we put on a big event in the church next to Bedford Tube Station is called St. John's. And we put on a big event there in the church, standing in the pulpit. I was standing in the pulpit of the church with a great big screen, doing a PowerPoint presentation. And we had actors, including Cheryl Baker. Cheryl Baker played the part of Polly Nichols and was murdered in front of the altar of this church. It's quite there's hundreds of people. It raised quite a few £1,000 for the Ripperology tube disaster, and it was very, very good. And we had actors playing the part of Cross or Lechmere and P.C. Mizzen and John Robert Paul, and it was very well done. And as a consequence of it, it got some publicity and so forth for the Bethany Tube disaster charity. And as a result of that, this TV company called Blink got in touch with me. I gave them advice on because they wanted to do a documentary on a new suspect, which was Lechmere, one that hadn't been well known at the time. And we got my friend Krista Holmgren fronted it. You must have seen the documentary, surely. Have you?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, to be honest, there's not many Jack the Ripper I think I've literally watched every one in the world. Yeah,
it was a very well made film, in my opinion. Very well made. I worked very closely with the production team, and they were very well made. There's everything. If you know how documentaries are made, everyone isn't going to tell the whole story about any subject you could come up with. Any of these the Cray ones or any of these, they're never going to tell the whole story because they've got a limited time to tell it in, and they want to tell a story for a particular angle. They're not going to cover everything you could know. There's this argument, that argument about this, that, or the other incident, because they wouldn't have time to do it. That's just how it is. But people think, oh, this documentary doesn't give the full picture on this, but that's just how documentaries are. Every single documentary, if it's about the Holy Grail or about D-Day or Pearl Harbor, they're always going to be the same. You know, it's just how documentaries are made. The documentaries about sharks or great white sharks, they don't tell the whole story either, do they? That's almost getting onto your guys' psychs, isn't it?
Yeah, but do you know what, Edward? I mean, obviously, I'm doing a book at the minute called "There's Something About Whitechapel," and I've spoken to Whitechapel historians, poets. I mean, Mick Priestley, friend of yours, I've seen a picture. His favourite Ripper suspect is Albert Backett.
Yeah.
But do you know what? They all say, everyone who speaks to me in this book said there's something magical about the East End.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
Yeah, it's a strange place. Now you mention that, I've done tours about other subjects as well. I did one tour starting at the Blind Beggar, which you're familiar with, of course, which is where George Cornell was murdered. And starting there, I didn't even touch upon that. I don't think I touched upon that because I was really going for that crossroads is called Mile End Gate.
Yeah.
There used to be buses used to have Mile End Gate written on them. There used to be a bus turnaround place there when I first moved to the East End. And it was a toll booth. That's why it's called Mile End Gate, because that road was a toll road in the old days. And I did a tour from Mile End Gate up to the Genesis Cinema, which is probably 200 yards, and back down the other side. And so it was the tour was 200 yards down one side of Mile End Road, 200 yards back down the other side of Mile End Road. That was all it was. And every few feet, I was going, this is where this happened, this is where this happened, this is where this happened, because it's got so many layers of history in the East End.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I mean, that cinema was the premiere for Carol Sparrows Can't Sing.
Yeah. Well, I
It's-
used to live in the block where that was filmed. Where that was filmed, actually.
Well, the opposite to it was where the Crays had the club, which was
Yeah, the Kentucky Club.
yes, you know. So this,
Yeah.
I mean, not quite close by.
That's where
if
they
you walk,
the party, the after party for the Kentucky Club featured in Sparrows Can't Sing.
yes, yeah. But
And
further,
they had the after party for it in there as well.
yeah, further down the road, I forgot the name of the. I mean, that's where Middlesbrough's most famous person, Captain Cook, emigrated, and then he got a house at Marlin Road, and then of course you've got George Russell's house.
Was he from Middlesbrough? I thought he was from Whitby, or was his ship from Whitby?
No, he's actually from Middlesbrough. In Middlesbrough, they've named hospitals after him. And to be honest, though, I never quite get it because, you know, I mean, obviously Middlesbrough's Brian Clough and Chris Rea and all this, but to be honest, Captain Cook, as soon as he was old enough to piss off, he went over to Australia, and then when he come back to Great Britain, I think he spent the last 15 years of his life on 88 Marlin Road in Whitechapel. So I think there's a
it's next to the building. Yeah, there is. Yeah. The building next to it, this has nothing to do with anything really, but the building next to it was the only Welsh gin distillery in London. It's still there, the original old building. But the pub where the Whitechapel Vigilance Society met was about. It's not there now. It's a block of flats, but it was about 20 feet further down from that as well. That's where George Luscott used to meet, and the Peasants' Revolt met up there. Booth, the guy that set up the Salvation Army, his very first meetings were held there. It's got very dense history, and it's my theory that the East End is like a palimpsest where you get, in the old days, people used to write on tablets, and they would wipe off what they'd written before and then write over the top. And the layers, they're still, even when they find these things, they can go through and they can see the writing underneath the other layers of writing. That's like these things, layers and layers of history laid on top of each other. And this is going to sound a bit poncy probably. There's a thing called a psychogeography of dislocation. It means that it's an area that has its own psychic power. I don't want to sound like I believe in weird things. That I think it's true, because I was drawn to live there for the fact of all these events that happened there, and it's a place where things happen, and one event affects another. Like the Krays. The Krays weren't the most brutal gang. Probably the Richardsons were. But everyone knows the Krays. Everyone associates the East End with the Blitz, but virtually the South Bermondsey, that area was blitzed probably just as badly. Booth, as I said, set up the Salvation Army in the East End. East End wasn't the most poor area of London then. Everyone assumes it probably was, but it wasn't. The South Bank, where Booth tried to set up the Salvation Army, it wasn't called Salvation Army, but he tried to get off the ground with his outdoor preaching events in the area around Waterloo on that South Bank, which was the poorest area, with the more prostitutes, more deprivation than the East End, much worse. And yet he couldn't get off the ground. He went to the East End, he suddenly get the Salvation Army suddenly starts. The fact that the Jack the Ripper murders were there, the whole Mosley thing was in the East End. He went to the South Bank as well, but it's associated with the East End. And the East End, it just has these layers and layers. The Peasants' Revolt, as I said, the siege of Sydney Street, which happened just over the road, really, from the Blind Beggar, which involves in Churchill as well. There's so many layers of.
And of course, there's the Jack Spots and all these kind of things, which the Bessabarians and it's just literally the East. I mean, back to Charles Dickens' days. There's always obviously Oliver Twist, the pickpockets, the East End. So it's a lot of people stereotype the East End with villainy almost thing. But can I ask you, Edward? I mean, do you spend a lot of time in the East End today, and how do you find it? I mean, obviously, I'm very familiar with it. What's the crime rates like in that these days?
I do go back. Sometimes I had to go back there for work last week, but I do go back, and obviously I go there when I do the films, and I socialise there. The East End's quite different now from how it used to be.
Yeah.
In two respects, probably. I was there in the 80s, into the end of the 90s, or the 80s and 90s, and when I first went there, that was the last hurrah of the old East Cockney-fied East End, if you like. There was still lots of sort of geezer types about, and a lively, quite vibrant, Minder. He's just died, hasn't he, Dennis Waterman? But that whole Minder, Only Fools and Horses, obviously set over the south of the river, but it's that same sort of Cockney thing. The Sweeney, all that sort of All Right, My Son type East End thing was still going on in the 80s. And it doesn't exist at all now. So it's been totally wiped out. Virtually all the what you'd call EastEnders have moved out to Essex or somewhere like that. Well, probably Essex near all of them, and including myself. Although I'm really just a Mockney rather than a Cockney. And the other, so one aspect is that. The other aspect is when I moved there, I remember thinking to myself once, there's not a single what you might call a middle class enclave in the East End, and there wasn't then. But now there's loads of bits of it which have become gentrified and quite posh. With nice pubs and things. Parts there are bits of Spitalfields, the bit nearer the city. I never used to go to, because the pubs were real dumps. They had bits floating in the pints. They were full of dossers, and the floor was just, your feet would stick to the floor if you went in, sort of thing. But there were decent pubs in Bethnal Green and places like that, which was where
Grave Maurice and that kind of thing. And
the Grave Maurice, when I was there, was slightly going downhill. Actually, it was a decaying grandeur. They had old-fashioned furniture. The old lady that used to run it got old, and it had become a bit seedy by then. It was more expensive because she had sort of airs and graces. So the Grave Maurice was quite an expensive pub to buy a pint in, but it wasn't really. It was a little bit grotty. But I was talking about the pubs up in Bethnal Green. It was the era of disco pubs, so there were some quite smart, quite happening pubs in the East End in those days, but not in the area around Spitalfields. And now the pubs in Bethnal Green are probably a bit grotty, whereas the pubs in Spitalfields, because it's been gentrified, there's quite nice pubs around there. And that area and the area around Wapping is quite whereas they used to be dumps when I was there, they're actually been sort of improved. And although part of me thinks, is against the sort of gentrification of these places.
Are you talking about pubs like Turner's Star?
Where?
Turner's Star. That's actually where they filmed Legend in Wapping.
Yeah. Did they film that there? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a nice pub. It's the only proper old pub left in Wapping, actually.
Edward, there's a comment here. So he really knows his stuff. First saw Edward on his own channel, and I found it really riveting. So you can go over to Edward's channel, which is the House of Lechmere. So yeah, you know what? You've been a little bit, what's the word, lackadaisical, I suppose, with your channel compared to what you used to be. Because I mean, I've watched it all now, and I've looked for you probably a year ago, and I've never seen you, and then I found your name, and I thought, but obviously, are you going to kind of get to the point where with your channel, Edward, you're going to do the Lechmere, but also bring along other suspects? Because Richard Jones is very good at doing, there's the Jack the Ripper, there's the 10 Weeks, the Autumn of Terror, but also the whole Victorian, the police, and obviously that's why he's very good at what he does.
Well, Richard Jones, to be fair, it's part of his business, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's doing it to promote his tour guide business. So it's work for him, isn't it? It's
So it's a hobby
promoting
for
his
you.
business. Yes, but I am, as I say, part of the reason I did the channel, not just because it was during the COVID thing, it is because I want to promote Lechmere as a suspect, and I want to write a book about him, which I've done bits and pieces on, but it's a big task because, as I mentioned, it's a multifaceted case against him. Well, his family background, which I haven't even touched upon, is quite complex, and there's many different layers to it, which I haven't even touched upon on my channel yet. The very first episode I did I don't know if you probably have seen it, if you've seen them all. I mentioned a tray from this. I think it was like an ashtray from a restaurant in the West End called Very's. And there is a big connection between when I developed the arguments about all this, in connection to it, which I haven't even actually got back to. It's the very first episode on the channel I did. I mentioned it, and I haven't even got back to what I was sort of teasing a thing. I am going to try and get back to it, but I haven't got around to getting back to it. But because there are loads of different aspects to Lechmere case, many more, in my opinion, than any other suspect. And I said I could do another 100 episodes. But it's a question of having the time to do it, which I will. Yeah. I will do in due course.
I mean, obviously, do you know what? I spoke to a lot of people, and I mean, I spoke to Lindsay Siver the other week, lovely girl, and her man is, but it's not in the way that Mick Priestley's is or yours is Lechmere. Hers is Sir William Gull, but she's not saying it's Jack. He's saying he's not Jack, and he's been dragged through the mud for all these horrific crimes, and the guy actually never done anything. I mean, obviously, he's one of
I know Lindsay quite well. She's got sort of a, I don't say crush. It's probably the wrong way to say it, isn't it? But on Sir William Gull. But she's very passionate about.
Yeah, she is. She's really good. I mean, you know, listening to. I mean, she's in this forthcoming book, which I'd obviously like to speak to you, Edward, as well, if you're free, maybe these next couple of days. But Lindsay, listen to some of the things. I mean, her experiences with the 10 Bells pub, and she was physically attacked. I mean, can I just ask you, Edward, before I let you go, what's your experiences with the 10 Bells pub? Have you had anything like that, or?
No, I'm a bit of a skeptic about supernatural things. So when I said about this psychogeography of dislocation, I don't really mean it as a supernatural thing, but I do believe that events do inform each other, and if something bad or major happens in a place, some people can be drawn to it, which then means something else happens there. But that doesn't mean it's supernatural. I don't, you know, to be honest, I'm not really into that sort of thing. I know that she said that something happened to her when she was staying there on the staircase or something. But yeah, I'm a bit of a no. You know, I don't believe in that sort of thing, I'm afraid.
I mean, so you're very familiar with the 10 Bells, and
yeah. They don't really like. I've been there quite a few times, but they don't really like Ripper stuff going down. I met a friend of mine who's interested in Ripperology in the 10 Bells. He's from Canada, and I met him in there when he was over here, and we're having a drink, and we were looking out the window, and they were chucking a load of stuff out of the cellar or the attic. I can't remember which, the cellar or the attic. And the pub used to be called the Jack the Ripper, didn't it?
Yeah, in 1988.
Yeah, and I've got two great big boards because my car was parked there. I wasn't drinking driving, I only one pint, and my car was parked there, and this garbage truck pulled up, and they were pulling stuff out of the cellar and chucking it in the garbage truck, and there was these two great big boards of reproductions of the Illustrated London News that were about, huge, great big reproductions, and they were just chucking them. That had been on the wall of the Jack the Ripper when it was called the Jack the Ripper, the 10 Bells, and we said to these guys, "Look, don't chuck them out." I managed to fit them in the back of my car and took them home with me. And there was a great big sign, probably 15 feet long, that had the Jack the Ripper on it, and it was full of graffiti and stuff. one of the pub signs that they chucked. I couldn't get that in my car, but yeah, they just binned a lot. I know one or two guys.
That was the centenary, you know, and I mean, compared the 10 Bells is very different now. It's a very expensive pub, but back then they were doing things like Rippertipples, and your beer would be dyed red. Do you know what I mean? So they were selling T-shirts and key rings, and where you today, and I find it a little bit sad. You know,
there's strippers in there as well. There's a stripper.
Yeah, yeah. Paul Begg told me, you know, him and Martin Fido, God rest him, used to go in. But that for me is a little bit sad, because it's part of the heritage, it's part of the social history, and it's slowly kind of dying away. And I mean, Paul Begg said something to me, and he said, Jamie, he said, Spitalfields is Jack the Ripper, and he said these days, you know, the councils are like, they're trying to cover up, and it's, well, you know, listen.
There's some people in the Ripper world which are very hypersensitive about these things.
Yeah.
For political sort of correctness reasons, I guess. But the reality is that at the time, Jack the Ripper was sensational. The thing about Jack the Ripper, or the Whitechapel Murders, was sensationalized and entered the folklore at the time. And a lot of these, I'm not snobby about the what you might call the seedier side of the Ripper world, because it's part and parcel of it. It's part of it. It's part of the folklore, which isn't necessarily strict history. It never will be strict history. Some people always should be a strict subject of discussion. It never will be, because it's got folklore. It's got nutty sides to it. That's just it. That's just what it is. It is what it is. There's a museum, which I don't know if you've been to the museum, which has got errors in it.
Yeah.
Because I know it's disgusting, it's trivializing it, it's got an error. If you've got an error in there, it can't be serious, all sort of thing. But they're missing the point, because there was a chamber of horrors opened up in Whitechapel Road during the Ripper murders, showing waxwork, you know, probably pretty poorly constructed waxwork dummies of the Ripper victims during the Ripper murders on Whitechapel Road. It was part and parcel. It always has been. And it just is what it is. And if it was in any other country, say this had happened in Paris or Chicago, yeah, it's St. Valentine's Day Massacre. I often compare it to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. I actually did live in Chicago for a year, but I was a baby at the time, so I can't really say what it's like. But I would imagine they've got bars there saying the Massacre Bar or something. I guess they probably have. Have you ever been there?
No, but they have, because, you know, I mean, obviously I've researched it for this book.
They're going to make money out of it, aren't they? They're not going to have
absolutely
Valentine's Day Massacre happen on their doorstep and not open up a load of bars called the Massacre or the Al Capone Bar or something. They're going to do it, aren't they? And have pictures of machine guns probably and stuff like that. They're not going to be too snooty about it. And so I've got no time. Any other city would. If it was in Tokyo, if it was in Paris, anywhere, they'd make money out of it. It'd be a proper tourist thing. And I think one of the tragedies of the Ripper thing in the modern day is you get these tour groups come in and they go out and they don't stay in the East End. There's nothing. There should be souvenir shops in the East End selling souvenirs for Jack the Ripper, because it makes money for the community actually, and brings people into the community to spend money. But they say, oh no, it's not. You can't have a trivializing the murder of someone by having a souvenir on it or something. It's sort of missing the point, really. I think.
Yeah, but you know what? A lot of the EastEnders reject that. Some people have spoke to this book and they said, listen, you know, a Cockney, it's not all about the craze and you know, and listen, Vidal Sassoon, the greatest ever hairdresser, came from Whitechapel. Just, you know, Billy Ocean, Bud Flanagan, there's so many things of the history, and these people are offended now. Of course, there's Jack the Chipper chip shops, there's Born to Bleed, Jack the Clipper, all these kind of different things. But you know, essentially your brick lanes and all that, in my head, you know, Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper really put Whitechapel on the map. And 134 years ago, that was the most famous place on earth. It was the poorest place on earth. But for 10 weeks, the residents were almost like they had their own reality TV show. You know, it was like Big Brother. The well was there.
Yeah, it is actually very true. As I said earlier, the poorest area of London was actually the area around the South Bank. But when Jack the Ripper came in, everyone assumed it was the East End, and the East End became the big focal point. And actually, as a place of London and English folklore, Jack the Ripper put the East End on the map.
Yeah.
In many ways, he did. He just did, and whether you like it or not, and it is central to a very central point of the identity of the area. Some people don't. Most of the people who don't like it, I think, are people who aren't really from the East End. When I lived there, no one really had a problem with it. That I ever met. It was just part of the thing. Lots of families from the East End would always claim that they had some sort of connection. Oh, my great grandfather knew this and had some sort of thing. That's what East End people are like. That they always like to think they had a connection. Like now, they all claim they've got connections to the Crays and stuff. Or I knew my uncle used to know all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's bragging rights, isn't it? And East End's a bit like that. Probably lots of areas are, to be fair, but yeah. So I don't take very seriously these.
So Edward, this future for your book. I mean, obviously Lindsay Sivet has just so she's going to do a book with the family of Sir William Gull, which I think it would be huge in the Ripper industry. There's so many people that are a bit cliquey. They're like, they've studied it the whole life, and you don't know the facts, and I'm the real one. Because I found that. Listen, I'm not an expert, but I'm a guy with a lot of passion, and I like to go and talk with people. But this book, obviously, I don't think there's anyone more qualified I've certainly ever come across to pull the Charles Lechmere theory across like yourself. How many years are we talking about that? Are you going to do it? How many years can we see it printed?
I've done quite a lot of it. It's a question of me being able to sit down and devote some time to do it without being distracted with other things. I couldn't put a time scale. It's not going to be 10 years or anything stupid like that, but it'd be considerably less than that. But having said that, I probably started work on it about 10 years ago. So yeah, but I will do it, and I'm determined to get it done sooner.
So, and your channel, I take it you've been to like Charles Lechmere's grave. You found some of his family members. What's their view on what you're doing?
Well, his grave. He hasn't got a grave. It's he was buried in the Tower Hamlets Cemetery, actually. But Tower Hamlets Cemetery. Have you been to Tower Hamlets Cemetery? It's behind the Tube Station. It's where Dr. Llewellyn, who is one of the main doctors in the case, so some people involved in the case there. And in the 60s, I think it was the 60s, they were going to knock down all the graves and turn it into a park or something like that. And there was objections. They stopped, but they'd already started knocking down the graves in about a quarter of it, the southern quarter of the graveyard, and that was where he was buried. So his graveyard was obliterated. His gravestone. I know I could take you to within probably 10 square feet of where it is, because I've looked it up on the cemetery maps. Yeah, I know where it is or was, and he's probably still under the ground there, isn't he? But I could take you where it is, but there's no marker or anything, because there's no markers in that whole chunk of the cemetery because they obliterated them when they were going to obliterate the cemetery, the gravestones.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'd like to include you in my book. I've got a book signed in Brick Lane, so maybe if we could speak. So it's something about Whitechapel. I'm going to be in London for a week, the back end of July, so hopefully we can meet up for a coffee. So Edward, your channel, last word on your channel then, what can we look for? I mean, what can I look forward to watching? But, there's a lot of tremendous stuff on yours, but can you just tell the viewers, because I'm going to share this on all the Jack the Ripper pages, so the channel is called The House of Lechmere.
Yep. And the next films I'm going to do, I've got two in the pipeline. One is with some descendants of Charles Lechmere. Another one is on a particular location where I was standing on a particular corner and doing work. I was working actually on Brick Lane actually, and I thought, if you look that way, this happened. that happened there, that happened there, that happened there, and I'm going to do a little film on that, because it is remarkably claustrophobic and how close these things were to each other when they happened. And it's sort of at this particular place where I'm going to do this film. It's going to literally be standing on a street corner saying, I'm going to do it very early in the morning when no one's about, like 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning or something. So it's totally dead.
Can I just ask you, what's people's reactions when you're talking to them and then you say, well, actually, your great-great-granddad was Jack the Ripper?
They don't. This causes some controversy within the Ripperology, because people say, "Oh, you're accusing people's relative of being Jack the Ripper." Most don't care. It doesn't reflect on them, does it? Yeah. Anyone who thinks it reflects on the living descendants are a bit stupid, and they're mostly a bit curious or just amused by it, actually. And it's that. You know, people. You know, I've been criticised by some people for, but if you're going to suggest any suspect, they're going to have probably some sort of relative around. So,
yeah,
if you're going to take that attitude, you can accuse anyone ever, could you? So you can make a case for anyone being the Ripper. But some people would say, "Oh, you're accusing so and so of being the Ripper, and what his family? They must be terribly upset." But I know members of his family. I've known members of his family from before I even knew that Charles Cross was Charles Lechmere.
Right.
When I lived in the East End, I've known them for years. You know, I know quite a few of them in the family. I've known them for decades, and they're not. They haven't blanked me out just because of this. You know.
So do you know what, Edward? It's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I'm going to keep watching your channel. I'm going to give it a little push for you, mate. And just the last word to you then, Edward. So is there anything you want to get across?
Well, what we always say is, we say all roads lead to Lechmere, because every time that something happens in the case, it ends up, there's a Lechmere connection to it. And that's it. All roads lead to Lechmere.
Very true. You know, there's so many people out there, and they're like, he was definitely Jack the Ripper, and Michael Ostrog wasn't even in the country. You know, I mean, some of that, the one guy who tells anyone who listens his granddad was Jack the Ripper was the grandson of Holmes. You know, and
I met that guy when he came over here. They did a documentary. They filmed us all in a hotel near the East End. They didn't use any of the footage, but I met the guy when he came over. Yeah.
Hi, Lindsay Sivert. So Lindsay Sivert has just come through. We were chatting about you, Lindsay. So if you want to scroll back, but no, do you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure, Edward. And as I said, you know, there's been a lot of people that stealing a living really off the back of Jack the Ripper. There's people out there. Oh, I've solved it. I found this rag. Which
I don't begrudge that, because again, it's part of the folklore thing. So there are some of the ridiculous theories, which would include gulls are ridiculous theories. I'll agree with Lindsay on that, but it is part of the folklore of the case. So I don't begrudge people making money out of some ludicrous, far-fetched bit of nonsense, because that is intrinsic to the whole thing of Jack the Ripper. And it's a bit like I think I was saying, the psychogeography of dislocation. It's mythology. There's mythology about this case, which actually is one part of the richness of the whole thing as well. So I don't begrudge people making money out of it at all.
I mean, the thing is, it's because it's all the relatives. You know, even if you say, right, Joe Bloggs was Jack the Ripper, the chances are his grandson's dead. So you know, you can sell this dead dog to someone, and no one's going to be clued in, unless you guys, the elite, as I call you, your Lindsay Siverters, your Richard Jones, Donald Rumbelows, you know, hang on a minute. No, he wasn't. You know, but there is a lot of them books being put out, documentaries.
Any book that there's probably some books that self-published that don't really get much attention, but any book that gets any sort of attention at all is given very close scrutiny by people within the Ripper. I don't really like the term Ripperologist, but the Ripper world on those forums, particularly on there's one of the best ones called JTR forums, in my opinion. It's the most reputable forum with the best research, JTR forums, and any new book will get looked at and probably torn apart with if they do poor research or put anything, any loose ends, it'll be torn to shreds. And if anyone wants to check any of these books that are inaccurate or far-fetched, they'll see on the JTR forums, including the one by Hayley Rubenhold on the 5 on the victims of Jack the Ripper. It's not about Jack the Ripper, it's about the victims of Jack the Ripper. But that's been torn to shreds, rightly so, because it's very weakly written. And there's a guy who wrote a book about the policing Jack. I think it's called Catching Jack the Ripper. I think it's called, which they didn't catch him, obviously. But that's what I think he's called it. And I've got it. It's not a bad book, but there are errors in it, which I pointed out. These in one chapter, there's I don't know how many errors, but I pointed all these errors out. So it's not only the suspect books that get torn apart. Anyone who writes a book about Jack the Ripper and makes a few errors in there, they'll be rapidly torn out and torn off a strip. That's just how it is.
Edward, can I ask you, obviously I come across Jack the Ripper 30 years ago, then I started reading about the Yorkshire Ripper, the Crays, the Essex Boys, but Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel murders, why is it, right? And I found this, you always go back to it, and you can never really leave it alone. I've written lots of books, and sometimes I think, oh, I'm finished with that now. But Jack the Ripper, I never ever get bored of it, and I never want to not learn about him. Why do you think this case holds that kind of magnet for drawing people in? Yes, he wasn't caught, but there's something more. I think, and obviously I've named this book. There's something about Whitechapel. Morrissey stood up in 2005, and he actually said that Morrissey's obsessed with the Crays and Jack the Ripper and West Ham and Pie and Mash and all this stuff, and
the Great Morris.
Yeah, one of his album covers.
I know,
the Great Maurice. But why is it? What is it about the East End?
Because, well, as I said, it's the mythology side, and as I said, it's the psycho. I don't keep saying this, but it's this thing about it being a psychogeography dislocation where event after event after event happens there, and it becomes part of the mythology of the whole thing. And the whole thing about the East End is then you've got the Victorian clothing, you've got all that, as you mentioned, Charles Dickens. There's layer after layer, and the mystery of who did it or who didn't do it, and it's just so many layers, and it's attracted TV companies film companies to make films about it, which adds to the whole thing as well. And often when you get a series like I'm going to say Star Trek, but I don't know whether Star Trek actually had a Jack the Ripper. They probably did. Lots of things like Star Trek will have an episode where they go back in time and they end up meeting or something with Jack the Ripper. I might be wrong about Star Trek, but that happens in lots of these programs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's a thing, and that's another layer which adds to the mystique. That's why Americans are infatuated. It's an international thing. Jack the Ripper's got international. Sounds pathetic to say, an international following. The crime thing. Yeah, it is, and you get loads of Japanese and foreign tourists, Spanish people go. You see Spanish tours with Spanish guides telling them about it. It's the most popular walking tour in London for all the tour groups.
Yeah,
walking tours are very popular across London, across all big cities, but it's the most popular one in London. And when I knew the guy who did the book about the shawl, the shawl that's supposedly linked to Kosminski.
Russell Edwards.
Yeah, I knew quite well. And he's disappeared lately, but I used to know him quite well. And he, when his book came out, there's a pub. Sorry, not a pub. The chip shop. Do you know the chip shop in Golston Street where?
Yeah, your Happy Days.
Yeah, that's now. I helped the guy who owns it. customised his chip shop because it's the only authentic location in the East End that's left to do with Jack the Ripper. And it's where an apron was left, part of the apron of Catanetto's, and some graffiti was left on the doorway. And the original doorway is there. It's a doorway into a chip shop now. And it's all customised. And when the book came out, I was sitting outside his chip shop. He has little tables outside, having some chips one evening. When that book came out, it was like Piccadilly Circus. The number of there was probably about 1,000 people came past, looking and gawping at the thing. It's big business, and it whenever anything happens, like a book, an event, a book, perhaps your book.
Yeah, well, do you know what, Edward? Can I just say that there's a chapter in there called "A Business That Makes a Killing," and it's about the films, the documentaries, Jack the Ripper toys. It's like, hang on a minute. So this book's kind of 134 years on. Like a look at, hang on a minute, did that happen all that time? And we're all interested. There's just a couple of questions from Lindsay. Some of us tour guides do a bloody good job, not all accurately telling the story. Sorry, not only accurate, but being respectful towards the victims and informing people about their lives. It's not all about blood and gore.
Yeah.
Paul Begg actually said to me, it's not really the crime, it's the mystery for me. So Lindsay said Star Trek had an episode called Wolf in the Fold based on Jack the Ripper. So there you go, Edward.
So I was right, was I? Okay, that's a good guess, wasn't it? I'm sure Lindsay would know that sort of thing. She'd win on Ripper trivia.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get Lindsay on in a couple of weeks. I'm going to send her the chapter. And listen, Edward, I'm going to send you my number. So could you let me know when you're free for a little chat? When it's done, I would send you your piece for you to okay, which I've done it to a few people, just about Lechmere, Whitechapel, East End, pie and mash, Cockneys. It's, I've delved into like the boxing history, the West Ham. So it's, Chaz and Dave. It's just all about, it's not, I mean, a lot of it is about Jack the Ripper, but, it's the Cockney rhyming slang. Where did it come from? All that kind of thing. So
well, these are the Pearly King. I don't know if you know about Pearly Kings and Queens. Did you say pie mash? There are so many different layers about the East End, which make it a very a rich area.
Yeah,
culturally and historically, a very rich area. And like Ches and Dave are actually from North London, of course, but they're somehow associated with the East End because they're sort of Cockney geezer type things. Well,
yeah. Do you know what, Edward? They would actually be classed as Mockneys, because one was from North London, one was from Middlesex, I think. Obviously, one's no longer here, but that's one of
the Cockney culture spread out from the East End. You'd only really call. I think I probably am a proper Mockney because I'm not even from the East. I lived there for a while, and sometimes I can sound like I'm from the East End, but I'm not at all. And so that makes me, I'm a proper Mockney.
I mean, the Bow Bells, the Bow Bells can be heard for 6 miles, or it could be many years ago.
Yeah, well, obviously. But I was born in Bloomsbury, which actually is allegedly within the sound of Bow Bells. It's near the British Museum. I was born near there many years ago, obviously, when I was born. And that is allegedly within the sound of Bow Bells. So I guess I could come from a proper company, but I wouldn't claim I am because I never really lived there as a kid or anything like that. I wasn't brought up in the East End or even in central London. I was brought up in Surrey. So for me to claim to be anything other than a Mockney would be a bit stupid. But I would say that Chaz and Dave are sort of I'd give them it. Yeah,
we can kind of let him off and bypass him. I was a bit mortified when I never found out. It was like finding out Mr. Miyagi didn't know karate. So I was a bit upset. I've got a couple of questions here for you then before I let you go, Edward. So Lindsay, I unveiled a new picture of the graffiti in that doorway of Happy Days for the local press.
She did when it was the chip shop was relaunched with this new decor. She cut the ribbon. Lindsay did. She cut the ribbon and was the official opener of the place.
Right. And J. Mac said it's a story which keeps on giving I like it, and it does not get solved, so it does keep on. It keeps you keep you thinking, if you like. Lindsay, there is a Cockney Museum on the outskirts of London. You should mention it in your book. I'm going to go and Google that now, Lindsay. But do you know what, Edward? It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I could speak to you all day. Listen, get a little bit more prolific with your channel, mate. I'd love to see Lindsay doing her own channel. Richard Jones does it. Richard Jones has been like my third wheel in my marriage for probably the last year or two. You know, my wife knows who he is, and yeah, you know. So do you know what? It's people like you use that keep it alive, really. And it's nothing about glorifying it. You know, I could never get involved with selling posters and key rings and toys, but books and documentaries, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, or YouTube channels, because it's a field to learn from, isn't it? And obviously, who to learn from the best than you guys?
I've never come across anyone in all my years involved in it who glamorizes or hero worships the culprit, who's known as Jack the Ripper. I've never known anyone to be like that, actually. That's a bit of a false.
You do get that with the craze. Obviously, you've got the naughty bus, and people are celebrating where, incidentally, really, it's a murder site. And I interviewed someone for the book, in this book, which I'll give you a copy, Edward, when it comes out. And he said, I went to school with his son, so I'm not going to go to some party where the, you know, I mean.
In George Orwell's time, I've been to events in the Blind Beggar. They hold events there, glorifying them. Quite honestly, yeah, I've been there, so I can't really. I've
done some filming last year there, and I mean, I did it with Sean Atwood, and around the bullet hole, they framed it.
Have they?
Yeah.
The Carpenters. Have you been the Carpenters on?
Yes. Yeah.
They've got a picture up of them, haven't they? But like a cartoony picture. But which is what the pub which allegedly their mother owned. I don't think she actually, but I suspect she didn't own it.
No, she did. It was very late on. No, it was 67. It was only literally months before. See, I've been around with Chris Lambiano. I was going to do his book, and he showed me what happened with Jack the Hat and all this, and it's very much part of the East End mythical folklore. I mean, Lindsay Sivert told me the other week, she said she's been in the museum, so she used to get the exhibitions out and not only pack it away, and you know, the suitcase and guns and all this, but you know what, it's people are interested in it, Edward, and it's the lights burning brightly.
Yeah, well, I know quite a lot about the Cray thing, as from people I know and whatnot, and living there for a long time. I'm pretty familiar with the Cole Cray thing. As I said, I've been to a few of their events they hold in the Blind Beggar in summer months in the outdoor bit.
Yeah.
Flanagan usually, you know, she's the model she's quite old now. She's in her 80s, I believe. Mm-hmm. But she sort of holds court there. She's very nice. She holds court there with lots of old villain types turn up, and usually they're even though the younger ones, they're nearly all infirm because their legs are knackered and stuff, and they're hobbling around. And I often, once I went there, it was quite embarrassing because I won about 6 raffle prizes. Every time they drew the raffle out, it was me. I was like, oh, God, embarrassing. I won all these different signed books by the great train robbers and all this sort of stuff. And it was, but I go, you go and Policis and all this sort of thing. You know, I've been all up through that sort of stuff. But the Cray thing it's another layer of history, isn't it? It's another layer of the East End.
Yeah, do you know, and I think it's never ever going to go away, particularly with the East End. A lot of people stereotype it. So, you know, some people have said in this book, listen, this offends us. You know, being a Cockney is not about robbing and giving people good art. So there's residents in Whitechapel, and historians and poets, and it said, you know, Vidal Sassoon and the guy who written the song Amazing Grace, he's from Whitechapel. There's Ashley Cole, the footballers from Whitechapel. So there's so many different things, but of course the area will only get linked with kind of villainy and crime and serial killers, but you know, it's never going to stop. And this is why if you go in, if you're walking on Whitechapel tonight or Shoreditch or something, you'll see every nationality, people from China, and they're all coming, paying the money to listen to some serial killer whose name we'll never ever know.
Unless you think it was Lechmere.
all roads lead back to Lechmere.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolute pleasure, Edward. Listen, I'll be in touch, buddy. I'll send you my number. It's been an absolute real pleasure. Listen, I've got nearly 7,500. All my followers, click over to Edward's channel. It's called The House of Lechmere. I've been watching it a very, very long time. Lindsay Siviter, it's about time you've done your channel, love. Lindsay said, remember, told you, but yeah, it's going to be in the book, Lindsay. But listen, Edward, absolute pleasure. And thank you so much. God bless, sir.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.